Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. I'm glad to have you back listening to the show, or watching if that's the case. We've got a great guest today, Bishoy Habib, who is an attorney who also invests and works with investors. So this is an excellent podcast to pay attention to. If you're not driving, I suggest take a few crib notes here and there. We do publish what's called the show notes. So when the podcast is published, you'll have that also. So if you're driving, don't worry. You can also come back to it later and get the information from that. So in any case, Bishoy, thank you so much for joining us, man. This is an excellent podcast to have the subject and your expertise, the fact that you invest. I'm just thrilled to have you. So thank you for being here,
Yeah, thanks for having me, Gary. It's a pleasure to be on this show. I know you got a lot of smart listeners out there that love to do investing, and so I'm happy to help out however I can.
Excellent. Well, I'll tell you what, I know probably every investor that's listening right now that's been in investing for 10 or more years has probably had a court case or two of, I like focusing on how do you identify properties? How do you analyze the properties? What's your secret formula? We can touch on that too, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of guys out there thinking, man, I hope he talks about what happens when whatever tenants, invite their whole family over and they're living there, or they, you don't allow pets, but they have pets, or they don't pay their rent. I mean, all these stories, and I've had them all. I used to own a property management company as well as a title company. So, over the years, you learn to have a sense of humor. We should write a book, Bishoy, on all those crazy stories. We should about the crazy things.
That would be great. That would be great. We'd have a lot to share. Yeah, property management's a tough one. I applaud you. The only people that I know that went into property management, I do know quite a few, they all just did it because they felt like there was no other property management company they could trust, and they had a decent sized portfolio. And then, they're like, well, I got 10 or 15 or 20 properties, and other people start asking them to manage. And then all of a sudden they form their own property management company, but usually don't hear good things. It's all heartache.
That's what, it is. One thing about property management is, guaranteed, you will never get a phone call where somebody's saying, "Hey, Gary, I just want to say thanks. You're my property manager."
Well, can I tell you something else? As an attorney, absolutely. I don't usually get too many calls when someone calls me and says, "Hey, I'm having a great day, Bishoy."
Oh, I know.
So
I know,
we're in the same boat.
So, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what. If you could take us back to the beginning. I mean, were you investing before you went to law school, or was that something that came about like as a result of going to law school? Or kind of take us back to how the two disciplines kind of came together for you,
Yeah. So I started my real estate journey when I was a kid. And by that, I mean, my dad started it and I would observe him. And so he was an immigrant. My parents were both immigrants, and they came here not knowing the language, not knowing the culture, not knowing what real estate was. And so my dad was, he had the vision enough to quit. He was a pharmacist, but he had the vision enough to say, to kind of phase out of that job and working for someone else and start doing real estate. So he did it until he kind of cut the W-2 and then became his own full-time investor in the 80s, actually. So going to the courthouse, buying properties from the physical steps of the courthouse before the internet and before I was born. And so I grew up in it. I remember for me, I thought the coolest thing was I don't really like, ironically as an attorney, I don't really like listening to rules. Like I just like doing my own thing sometimes. And so I think that suited me well. So I saw him kind of making his own schedule and making his own, just whatever he wanted to do. And don't be mistaken, he worked harder than anyone, but he was able to do the things he wanted to do and take us to school and pick us up and things like that. So, from a young age, I was interested. I negotiated my first commercial lease when I was 15 years old in his building. Oh, wow. And I don't really know how much negotiating I actually did, but in my mind, I did a lot. And I was with the state of Florida, was the tenant. And so I thought that was a pretty satisfying feeling. And so really from the time I got into college, I started investing passively as a limited partner in a lot of different investments. And a lot of them happen to be in New York, where we have ties. in hotels and hospitality. And so I ended up doing that. Understood what a fund was, what a syndication was. All this stuff was happening in college. And then I went to law school and it became even more neat. And so I always knew I wanted to go into real estate. I didn't know I was going to be a lawyer. But then I was like, let me get my law degree. I could kind of do whatever I want with it. When I graduated law school, it was 2012, and the market was where it was. Now we can look back and say, I wish we bought everything, but in the moment, you didn't realize that, right? So I was like, well, let me go practice law. So I moved to New York, got my license up there as a New York attorney. And I'm in Tampa, Florida, by the way. So, but at the time I moved up there, my first time leaving Florida. And I spent 2 years working with those same principals and sponsors that were doing those hotel deals. The largest hotel developer in Manhattan history, with almost 100 hotels developed in Manhattan. So amazing experience working with ground up construction, construction financing, ground leases, disposition of $100 million asset. We didn't really have that in Florida at the time. So, not in Orlando where I grew up. So now you see those developments popping up more and more. But the point is that kind of blew my mind. And at the same time, being in New York built my work ethic. And so when I moved back down to Florida a few years later, I brought those experiences and that work ethic and kind of worked my way up, investing throughout the way, different kinds of investments. The main thing when you ask about my investment strategy, a lot of it has to be passive because I just don't have the time to go out there and find deals and manage properties. And I've had a couple flips, hate them. I've had some, troubled tenants. We've all had troubled tenants. It's a pain in the what. And so I just don't like the traditional single family strategies. But what I have done successfully is been a limited partner in people and ventures that I really have faith in, and that's done well for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I personally, I started out very actively involved. I mean, I was, finding the properties, purchasing them, managing the rehab jobs. I didn't really swing a lot of hammers myself, but and I managed them from the management perspective, in interviewing tenants and all that. And it took a lot of time, but I was making good money. The thing is that time versus money conundrum. If you
Yeah.
would call it that, eventually time starts to win out over the money. You still make the money, but you learn to value, or I guess quantify your wealth in terms of time, if more or not, if just as much as not more than the money, because you want to start go from trading your time for money to eventually trading your money for time. So you can do
Yeah.
stuff, fun things with your kids. But well, I'll tell you what. So the passive strategy, like I've got a few things I do where I'm really not, the tenants don't even know who I am. I'm that far removed, but I have some direct ownership. Are you doing like fractional ownership, or what are some of your favorite ways to do it? Is it syndications? Um, if you could fill us in there a little bit, that'd be great.
Yeah. And to your point about the time and money thing, it's like my mom always said, like when you're young, you have all the time in the world and no money, and then you get older and it's the
Mhm.
other way around. And so you got to kind of find this middle ground. But the reason we do this, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Gary, is not the money. We're not out to. I'm not like a very materialistic guy, but the money buys me the freedom. It buys me the flexibility. It doesn't buy happiness, but it buys you the freedom, and that tends to make people more happy. That's at least my feeling. So couldn't agree with you more on that. In terms of the passive investments, for me, I kind of lucked into some of them. Like I said, literally in college, I was investing in passive hotel deals, right? And so that was funds,
Nice.
that was joint venture agreements, limited partnerships, a couple syndications, but mostly smaller groups. So the syndications, it wasn't like we were publicly raising money. It was just like kind of a group of, families that were kind of, raising money together.
Mhm.
I helped actually from that experience. I was able to go out and create my own fund several years later. Actually, during COVID, one of my clients had their line of credit frozen up from the bank overnight because COVID happened, and it's a land entitlement company. And that land
Mhm.
entitlement company, to me, that's one of the, success stories of my investment track record. And so I mean, imagine being a land entitlement company in North and South
Mhm.
Carolina and Florida in 2020. And so,
Mhm.
very big ambitions, very big aspirations for them. And so, I was able to kind of pull some money with friends and family and put it in there, and everyone's been happy with that. So it's a couple different things. Sometimes it's just something like a simple note and mortgage because it's a fix and flip and
Mhm.
I'm lending the money, right? So that's a passive investment to me. As long as I feel comfortable with the security, that's a passive investment. I'm
Mhm.
not doing anything and I might be making 16 or 20% on my money. So it's different. And
Yeah.
by the way, we could talk about creative deals all day. We could talk about,
Yeah.
we bought a couple sub two properties. We just closed on one
Mhm.
last week, actually. My business partners and I, 2%.
Mhm.
We seller financing for 2%. So we closed for
Mhm.
30,000. It's a $500,000 home. We've done all kinds of
Wow.
deals like that. I'm not managing
Mhm.
them actively, but yeah, I mean, there's a billion different ways you could skin the cat in terms of a passive investment. So that's just what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like the fact that you've got experience from New York and also you're in Tampa, Florida now. And it's funny because Florida is personally my state of residence. I haven't been there for a while, but if it's for family reasons. But I like spending. I mean, it's so diverse because I can spend time in a place in North Lauderdale, or go to the West Coast and be in Inglewood, which is about an hour and a half south of you in Tampa. We got clobbered pretty good with the last Hurricane Milton. I mean, we were. It's funny the property that was on the Gulf side, that one, no problem at all. The water just went right underneath it all. But the one that was on the mainland side of Lemon Bay, it got clobbered. That bay just came in and took everything in its path, and sliding glass doors, kitchen cabinetry. I never seen that. You couldn't have done that by hand if you wanted to. This thing was just a clean swipe. But in any
Yeah.
case, I love it down there. And there's a lot of people from the Northeast who have eventually settled there. So you have that strong work ethic. I'm not saying people from Florida don't know how to work. That's not what I'm saying. But there's nothing like people from the Northeast that come down here with that hustle. And Florida's still a great place to move to, and everything's relative. Yeah, it's more expensive today than it was 4 years ago, but everything's relative. So your profits are that much more too. Um, but are there what are what's if you don't mind, let's talk about some of your life experiences, or maybe some of your tenants. Obviously not mentioning names and things like that, but what's one of the best things you've seen people do um, in investing? You were part of that, supporting them as their attorney or being a partner. And then let's follow that with maybe one of the biggest mistakes you've seen somebody make, or maybe they didn't know it was a mistake until after the fact, which is usually the case. you know. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about something that's good to do, which is creating separation between yourself personally and your assets. That is like, seriously, I get asked all the time, and there's not a bigger thing to me as an attorney is what do you recommend? What's a common mistake investors make? I'm telling you, do not put investment property in your personal name. There's really no upside to it. There's not that many things as an attorney is a universal. This is a universal. Don't put investment property in your personal name. You
Yeah.
can still get the tax benefits of it. You can still, there's still a lot of ways that you can
Mhm.
maximize every positive upside, but don't be lazy
Mhm.
and don't do that. And I'm here in Florida, and I'm here to tell you, put it in a land trust if you can. If you have an attorney who
Okay.
knows about land trusts, and I know everything about land trusts. So,
Mhm.
what I would tell you is the smartest people are the ones who stay off the map. The smartest people are the ones who stay off the radar. Um, I I'll tell you a juxtaposition, right? Which means like two different scenarios. I had
Mhm.
two different clients, okay? Because you're asking me the best and the worst
Mhm.
thing that happened, and I'm just going to
Yeah.
conflate them into one
Mhm.
story. Because it
Mhm.
really, for me, it created this really clear, like black and white, because it was happening at the same time within a few months of each other, and it was just two different stories.
Okay.
So I have one client, let's call her Jane, and Jane was worth over $10 million, right? Like, I don't know exactly, but she had, 30, 40 properties, and a lot of them were paid off, by the way. Jane was smart. Jane used me. We put each of those properties in a land trust, and we had a trustee on there that I helped, that I was involved with. So her name stayed off the public record. And so she was anonymous. Okay. Even though she had millions in equity in those properties. I had another client, let's call him Jim. He owned 3 properties, and he had them all in his own name. I don't know why. He wasn't listening to me. He didn't want to pay the small fee to move him into a land trust because he had already bought them. So anyways, Jim's son driving his car. He's 17 years old. He just got his license a year ago. He's driving his car. He gets into a car accident. The first thing that attorney does that's representing the plaintiff, the person who got hit with the car, looks up the owner of the car, sees that it's Jim, looks Jim up, sees that he owns 3 properties. So yeah, maybe one of these is his homestead, but he's got 2 investment properties. So you know what that means? He's rich. We're going to sue him.
Yeah.
And they did. And the problem was they found him. And if they had never have found Jim's 2 properties, because that's public record, right? So that's the thing I always tell people. You can have 10 million, $100 million in the bank. Nobody will ever know. That's not public information. But what you're doing when you keep properties in your personal name is you're showing everyone your bank account, basically, in a different way. Jim got sued. It didn't go well for him. He lost a lot of money. Now at the same time over here, she got in a lawsuit as well, but nobody even was able to track it down. Nobody found her. It was a slip and fall with one of the tenants. I didn't hear anything about it, but I presume what happened was the attorney, they hired an attorney. They probably saw that she owned nothing, and they probably dropped it. I don't know if she ended up settling for a couple $1,000s or something stupid like that, but it was nominal because they couldn't track her down. And so when we want to talk about, the right thing to do and the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do, I think that's a very clear-cut situation. And it was weird that it all happened within a couple months of each other in my life. So a lesson to all investors out there, regardless. And one more point on that. You think I'm talking to the beginners, the beginning investors, and I'm really not, because I have people who have been doing this for 20 years, and they look me dead in the face and say, it's never happened to me before, so it's not going to happen to me again. And I think that logic is so out of whack, but what do I know?
Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. No selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live. Be ready to take notes and ask questions, because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. Go to realestatewithgarywilson.com, click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class, as many as you want, going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. Yeah. No, I know. I mean, if you live long enough investing in real estate, you're going to have some challenges. And I'm living proof. I went years with no problems, but thankfully, like you, I met somebody early on who became one of my best friends and my personal attorney. And I usually want to say, look, it's just don't do anything more till you do this one thing. And he's exactly what you said. His thing was start an LLC. Back then, LLCs were still relatively new.
Yeah.
It was sort of like not a lot of case study, but it gave you the liability protection and some anonymity. So what we did is I didn't actually set him up. Well, I did it for you myself, and he said, don't do that. He said, have a registered agent. There's certain states where you can get anonymity if you do that. But in any case, so fast forward. Well, here's what he told me. He said, number one, your first line of defense is you're a good owner. You keep your properties up to date, clean up, meeting all the codes, safe, reliable, all that stuff. Number two is insurance. You got good property insurance. And then number three is the entity structure. There's not like number three is less important than number one. So those 3 things are mandatory to keep your wealth, play defense. And I had
Great advice.
proverbial slip and fall. Yeah, I had a slip and fall, and it was the daughter of one of my tenants. We had just put in new handrails because the code had changed to be where you need a handrail for 4 or more steps to be handrail for 3 or more steps. And we had to go around, count them all up, put them in where we got, 3 more steps. Sure enough, that night it was wintertime, so the mortar hadn't yet really set. And her daughter was coming up the steps, and there was ice sheeting up on the steps, slipped and fell. And they were so excited. The daughter was like, "Yahoo! I'm going to get rich, old man Wilson." Guess how much that cost me?
How much?
Zero.
Zero.
I called the insurance company the next day. They said, "No problem. You've got such and such a coverage. You don't have even have out of pocket for this. It's covered 100. Her medical is covered 100%." And it was owned in an LLC, thank goodness. So they didn't come get my personal assets. And then I had a fire one time, a whole house fire. And you'll love it. This I'm literally with a fire company helping my wife hang a banner for her new business in one part of town. And say they've all got their radios on, or the firemen. They were up on the cherry picker hanging the banner. And I could hear this call coming through. I'm like, holy crap. That sounds like my property over in whatever it was, East Liberty or something. And sure enough, about a minute later, my property manager calls and she says, "Hey, are you paying attention?" I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "You're on the news." I said, "No, I'm not. I'm with the fire." And she says, "No, your property's on the news. There's helicopters flying overhead." They got the tenant on the camera, and she's sitting there saying, "My 7-year-old grabbed a lighter and lit the curtain, and the curtain lit this and lit that. The smoke detectors went off. Thank goodness." And the whole time, the husband's trying to shake her and telling her to shut up. It's just, this couldn't be. You couldn't script this in Hollywood if you wanted to. It was just
we gotta get the
I'm
tape
sweating.
of that. We gotta get the tape
Oh,
of that news story.
I'm telling you, and I'm like sweating bullets here, because I'm outdoors. In any case, I shouldn't ramble. But if you could, I
That's
want to
great.
dig in more into the entity structure. So a lot of us have used LLCs, and some of us have used land trusts, and you mentioned land trust right off the top, and I'm so glad you did. Are there other types of trusts that we could use or should use in certain instances? Or is land trust sort of like that's the that's the holy grail? If you have that, you know, you're covered. Can you kind of dig into like how does that get set up? What does that mean? Maybe how
Yeah.
are you protected? That kind of thing.
I'll preface it by saying that every state deals with land trusts differently, and technically there aren't even
Mhm.
land trusts in all 50 states, right? So I'll start with
Mhm.
that. I just happen to be, just like your homestead is, Florida is the #1 state for um, land trust, and that means there's the most protection. And what people don't know, and I didn't even know this till I started digging into land trust a few years ago and became an expert at them. Florida is the only state in the entire country where, and I say this because a lot of people invest in Florida, even if they're not from here, but we are the only state in which you actually have liability protection similar to an LLC and a land trust. Meaning, if you own a property in a land trust and someone slips and falls, they can't sue Gary personally. They can sue what the land trust owns, not Gary. And so there's a shield of liability against personal liability that's not available in other states with the land trust. They can come after the beneficiaries. So that's always something I like to point out, because 99% of people don't know that unless you read the Florida statutes on land trust. Now, how does it work? Well, I mean, your first question, is there other kinds of trust? I mean, land trust was created for the sole purpose of holding real estate. Therefore, it is the best vehicle to hold real estate in terms of a trust. Can you put real estate in other trusts? Absolutely. There's a ton of different trusts you can use. You can use revocable trusts. You can use irrevocable trusts. There's pros and cons to both, which is not really relevant to this conversation. But short answer is I recommend the land trust. Now, the way it works is you're going to have yourself, presumably you would be the beneficiary, right? And you would have somebody is called a nominee trustee, because the trustee's name goes on the public record, right? Someone's name has to go on the record as trustee. We don't put your name, we put a nominee, and that's where I come in. Not me personally, but there's a whole other entity I have just for that purpose that protects my clients. So I'm not on the deed, they're not on the deed, because when I put myself on the deed when I first started, I was getting all sorts of calls and certified letters and just nasty people trying to sue me. And I'm like, wait a minute, I don't own this property. I actually don't have anything to do with it technically. So I got wise and I figured it out. Um,
Yeah.
the advantages to the land trust are threefold. There's many more than three, but the big three are liability protection, like we just said in Florida. Anonymity, that's the big one, right? So
Yep.
people don't realize you can't shoot what you don't see, right? That's the big thing. Everyone says to
Yeah.
me, well, Bishoy, why am I being anonymous? I'm not trying to hide anything. I'm not doing anything shady. We live in the most litigious society in history. We in Florida, we have double the amount of lawsuits as any other state, and
Yeah.
lawsuits everywhere are going up and up because people see it as a quick payday, to your point. So being off
Yeah.
the radar doesn't matter if you're doing everything right. It's just one more barrier that we put to protect you from liability. And a lot of those lawsuits are
Yeah.
frivolous because people are just trying to collect an insurance payout, or maybe they see that you have money. So we have anonymity, we have liability protection, and then we have estate planning purposes. And what I mean by that is you can avoid probate. People, if you've dealt with probate before, you know how painful of a process it is. They tie up your property for months or even years if you have a lot of assets. You can't sell the property, you can't do anything with the property until the probate is completed, at which point you can. If you have a land trust, you can put in there, when I die, this property shall immediately go to X, Y, and Z. And that property then avoids probate and goes directly to who you want it to. No lawyer's fees, no court costs, no exposing it to outside creditors, which probate does. It's a very, very big deal to those who understand how painful the probate process can be.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I know a lot of people too, they'll use trust. How do I want to say this? We have the opportunity to do 1031 exchanges, and I'm not knocking them. I've done them before, but we have clients that use trust um, to exchange properties, and it's a lot more lenient. Like at 1031, you've got the time frames: 45 days for identification, 180 to close. But inside a trust, you don't have those same restrictions. I don't know if a land trust will do that. Well, but have you ever worked on those before? Any those type of entities set up where you can sell a property, keep the proceeds in there, redeploy to buy another asset, and then you're kind of like kicking the can down the street, so to speak, like a 1031 exchange. I personally not done one. I'm actually asking personally more as much as the audience, because I'm curious to see if I want to do that the next time,
Is that I haven't. Is that like a 1031 exchange, or is that something else?
It's actually not an 1031 exchange. It's you put the property in a trust, and then it probably, if I was to guess, and I'm not an attorney, obviously, or an accountant, but they may be just selling the beneficial rights of the trust, maybe is what they're doing. So the property may stay in the trust, and somebody else now
Oh,
has a beneficial rights to it.
oh yeah,
That may
yeah.
be
We do
what they're
that.
doing.
We do that all the time. We do that. I misunderstood. I
Okay.
thought you were saying deferring taxes. I was like, I don't know anything about that. But if
Okay.
you're talking about just strictly selling the beneficial interest in the property, we do that all the time. So I'll give you a prime example. I'm doing these all
Okay.
day, the subject to transactions, right?
Mhm.
So the reason that we have to structure it creatively with a subject to transaction, and for those who aren't familiar, the subject to means I buy your property, but we leave the current mortgage in place. So therefore I take it subject to the current mortgage. The reason you would want to do that
Okay.
is because you have a low interest rate, right? So you have it at 3%,
Gotcha.
you can't make your payments anymore. I take over your loan and I own the property. The problem is these banks lent at 3% and now they can get 6 or 7. So they want to call that loan due. And they have something called a due
Mhm.
on sale clause in every mortgage. If they see that the property transfers from Gary Wilson to Bishoy Habib, that's a different person. If they see the
Right.
property transfer from Gary Wilson to the 123 Main Street Trust, or the
Mhm.
Wilson Trust, I mean, they don't know any better. And so,
Okay.
it's kind of a way to, transfer the property, and then we assign the beneficial interest inside the land trust after this is all done. And so even if the bank did find out, we can lean on the
Yeah.
Garn St. Germain Act of 1980.
Yep.
But either way, I mean, there's ways that we can kind of create it to protect, everybody involved. And so that's exactly, I think, what you're saying, where we're selling the beneficial
Yeah.
interest, but title remains the same. Yeah, we can do that.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, to me, stuff like that, if everybody was educated and understood this, they probably would use these methods, these entity, holding, strategies to give themselves liability protection, anonymity, and also some other benefits as far as property acquisition and keep being able to take over a mortgage at 3% as opposed to getting a brand new one at 6 or 7%, and to keep the lenders at bay. I mean, I think technically they're prohibited from calling in the note that's inside of a trust, barring non-payment. I guess if there's non-payment, they can still, hey, wait a minute, we gotta make good on this. But if somebody's paying the mortgage and it's inside a trust, and I'm writing the check versus you're writing the check, that's really not a reason for them to call the note for these properties inside the trust.
Yeah,
So kind of
exactly.
interesting that whoever put that in. I'm gathering, and this is my own opinion. I'm gathering there must have been a lot of politicians that owned properties when they were putting that bill through.
I
you know,
think it was Ronald.
so,
I think it was Ronald Reagan, and the concept was we want to promote
mm,
estate planning, and so the Garn Saint
mm,
Germain Act is very big, but that provision particularly wanted it to be so that we weren't punishing Americans for trying to plan for their estate. And so what it says is if you move the asset into your home into a revocable trust, then they can't call it
mm,
due. So I think that was the
yeah,
idea behind it, which to me makes perfect sense.
yeah. Well, I love it. So now, how do you feel about LLCs? I know a lot of people started out using LLCs and then they started moving towards using land trusts. Are LLCs still used, or can you use them in conjunction with land trusts? Is there
Yeah.
any reason to do that?
Yes, there is. There is reasons to do that. And
Okay.
I don't want to overwhelm the audience with the complex nuances of asset protection, but you absolutely do want to use LLCs. So if you want to go to the second layer, if the first layer is a land trust, the second layer, then we could hold the beneficial interest inside of an LLC from a state that has charging order
Ah,
protection. And charging order protection, the short version of it is that if somebody sues you, they can't just take your shares in that LLC. They're very limited in what
gotcha.
they can collect from you if they sue you and they are successful.
Yeah, I actually have one of those in Wyoming, and
That's
again, it was
the
another.
state. That's the one.
Is that
You
okay?
got
Cool. Yeah,
Delaware,
what is one of my
Wyoming,
friends up
Nevada.
in? Yeah, there was a couple guys I met at a mastermind up in they were from Savannah, Georgia. And it was an interesting mastermind because there was four attorneys, four pastors, a nurse, a photographer, and me. That sounds like the beginning of a pretty good joke. There was four attorneys
Yeah.
and four pastors, but we're talking about this because they invested. They said, "No, you this is what you want to do," and they connected me with an attorney out there. And that was, I don't know how many years ago, probably 12 years ago. And I've been doing it ever since, and it's worked
Wow.
perfectly. Now, you still have to maintain you want to be a good operator. You want to be a good citizen. You don't want to take chances just because there's protections out there. That's not smart, Um,
Well,
but
here's
in
what
any case, I
here's
tell
what
you
I
what,
tell people. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
yep. No, I'm
I,
fine. Go right ahead. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
just gonna say, here's what I tell people. It's like there's no bulletproof. I don't like the word bulletproof because it implies this sense of being, untouchable.
Mhm.
No one's untouchable, right? If you're gonna get sued, you're gonna get sued. But what we do is
Right.
we create as many barriers as we can to make
Mhm.
it difficult and make it expensive and make it prohibitive for people to come after you. Now, if you really did something bad as a
Yeah.
landlord, somebody's probably going to be able to sue you. But if people are just, trying to slip and fall and trying to collect a quick
Mhm.
payment, we want to create as many layers. And so doing the layers like
Yeah.
we just said, first they're going to have to hire an attorney, then they're going to have to find out who owns this land trust, then they're going to see it's a Wyoming LLC. They're going to have to find out who owns this Wyoming LLC. That's not cheap. That takes time, that takes money. If it's a false
Yeah.
claim or a frivolous claim, chances are someone's not going to spend that money. But if it's a legitimate claim, they may. So, to your point, these are all
Yeah.
barriers. Being a good operator is a barrier and a very good one, right? But they all work hand in hand, to your
Yeah.
point. So, I agree 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing to it, I probably get in trouble for saying this because I love the state of Wyoming. I've been there many times. But if you think about it, if you're dealing with a property in Florida, who's going to go to fly to Laramie County, Wyoming, for a court case when there's a high probability, even if they got a judgment in their favor, they're not going to be able to collect. I mean, so, but the whole
Yep.
thing point was who's going to go to Wyoming? It's going to have to be a pretty good court case to do that.
Yep,
So, but again,
I
I love
agree.
Wyoming. I love the people of Wyoming. It's just, it's not very close to Tampa. So, hey,
It is not.
I tell you, we covered a lot here, Bishoy, and I really appreciate you sharing so much. And I know you're doing this on your own time. There's no payment for this. And for everybody listening, we do this as a community service, and we would love to have your review, particularly on this podcast, because you got an actual attorney on who invests himself. I mean, you don't always get this. So Bishoy, how can people get a hold of you if they want to maybe do a joint venture with you or a syndication or even just maybe have you represent them if it's possible? What's the best way for them to reach you?
I love that. I love that because I have clients who need money. I find them money. I have clients who want to invest. I plug them in with deals. And sometimes I get involved if it makes sense. And obviously the legal side. So, best way to get a hold of me, I'm on the social media platforms. So Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So it's at Attorney Bishoy, Attorney Bishoy. You can find me on LinkedIn. My name's right there at the bottom of the screen, Bishoy M. Habib. And then my law firm's name is Levacy Legal, Lev like Victor, ACY Legal, and that's levacylegal.com.
I love it. So legacylegal.com and ampersand or the hashtag, sorry, not hashtag, it's at Attorney
Yeah.
Bishoy, Bishoy. Everybody
Yep.
write that one down.
Yeah. Hit me
And
up. Hit me
now is
up.
it,
I'm making a lot
can
of
you,
content.
can you, there you go. Can you consult with people around the country, or do you really have to have them be in Florida, the state of Florida, to be able to speak with them and consult with them?
I have clients all over the country, actually all over the world. I have international clients as well. What I cannot do is advise on state-specific laws. So if you're in Wyoming and you ask me, how does this Wyoming law work? I'm not going to advise on that. But I do counsel clients all over the country. I can help them kind of, bounce ideas, structure deals, even kind of review documents for them. As long as we're not crossing that line of giving, advice on, something that I'm not able to advise on. So, and we could always discuss that case by case as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, Bishoy, thank you again very much. And then for audience listening, whether you're watching on YouTube or just listening, we appreciate your participation. I mean, it's fun for me to do this. I get to meet awesome people like Bishoy. We love to hear from you. Again, your reviews are really important to us. It's what actually makes our podcast world go around. But drop us a line every now and then. We'd love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. In the meantime, take care of yourselves and God bless you and your loved ones.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.